Japan's population crisis has reached a critical threshold. Last year, the country recorded fewer than 700,000 births, the lowest figure in its recorded history. The government is responding with a $25 billion annual program. So far, none of it is working. The popular narrative blames anime and so-called herbivore men, a generation supposedly too absorbed in fantasy to pursue real relationships. The data does not support that explanation. Birth rates for adult content consumption in Japan are broadly comparable to other developed nations. France, which has a native birth rate of 1.7, consumes similar material. Japan's birth rate sits at 1.15. The cultural theory simply does not hold. The actual cause is structural. Japan's birth crisis is, at its core, a marriage crisis. The marriage crisis is, at its core, an economic one, and the economic crisis is fundamentally a gender crisis. One figure makes this clear. In France, nearly 3 in 5 births occur outside of marriage. In the UK, the figure is roughly half. In Japan, it is 2%. Children born outside of marriage are statistically rare, and marriages are in sharp decline. Japan recorded fewer than 500,000 marriages for the third consecutive year in 2025, the lowest level since 1933, when the country's population was half its current size. The central question, then, is not why Japanese people are choosing not to have children. The question is why marriage has become increasingly unattainable. The demographic data on relationships is stark. 1 in 3 young people report no interest in romantic relationships. Among men in their 20s, nearly half have never had a girlfriend. 1 in 6 plan never to marry. Yet among married Japanese couples, the total fertility rate is 1.91, below replacement, but not catastrophic. The crisis is driven by the declining rate of marriage itself. Several interconnected forces are responsible. The first involves women's careers. Sociologists describe what is known as the M-shaped employment curve. Women enter the workforce after completing their education, exit when they have children, and attempt to re-enter later. In Japan, that middle exit is closer to a permanent departure. Japanese workplaces continue to operate on the assumption that mothers will withdraw from professional life. When women observe that having a child means losing their career, while household responsibilities remain entirely theirs, the calculation becomes unfavorable. Marriage stops appearing as a partnership and starts appearing as a professional penalty. The second force is economic. After Japan's economic contraction in the 1990s, the labor market divided sharply. Today, roughly half of young men work in non-regular employment, part-time or contract roles with limited benefits and no long-term security. Research has identified a threshold. Men need to earn approximately 3 million yen, around $20,000, per year before marriage becomes financially viable. 7 in 10 men do not reach that figure. Among men in non-regular employment, only about 1 in 5 marry. Among those with stable regular employment, more than half do. The problem is that 40% of young men do not hold a stable regular position. The third force is housing costs. In Tokyo's greater metro area, newly built condominiums now average over 100 million yen as of 2025. Central units approach 150 million yen. Prices in some areas rose nearly 40% in a single year. Renting a family-sized apartment typically costs between $1,300 and $2,300 per month for roughly 500 square feet. The cost of raising one child through junior high school exceeds $100,000. There are approximately 9 million vacant homes in rural Japan, some available for little or no cost, but career advancement is concentrated in urban centers. Relocating is not a realistic solution for most working-age people. The fourth force is work culture. approximately 10% of Japan's entire workforce, millions of people, log more than 80 hours of overtime each month, the equivalent of 2 additional full work weeks. More than half of the workforce reports serious work-related stress. Among those working 60 or more hours per week, more than 1 in 4 report symptoms consistent with depression or anxiety. This pressure falls disproportionately on women. Wives perform 5 times more household labor than husbands. Women working full-time still handle an average of 25 hours of housework per week, a total of 65 or more hours of combined labor. If a woman becomes pregnant, informal workplace pressure, a phenomenon termed matahara, a portmanteau of maternity and harassment, often signals that she is no longer considered a core team member. She may be passed over for major projects. Colleagues may question her commitment. 1. Legislator Matsumoto described witnessing a colleague who had returned from maternity leave in a constant state of apology for needing to leave on time. That dynamic, parenthood framed as a professional liability, remains embedded in many workplaces. Men face a parallel constraint. Fewer than 1 in 3 fathers return home in time for family dinner on a typical workday. Japan's parental leave policy is formally generous, but only roughly 2 in 5 men took paternity leave in 2024. The legal right exists. The cultural cost of exercising it is significant. Taking leave to care for a newborn is widely understood to carry professional consequences. There is a 5th and growing pressure: double care. A rising number of workers, predominantly women in their 30s and 40s, are simultaneously responsible for childcare and elderly care. 1 in 10 facing this dual burden leave the workforce entirely. 8 in 10 of those are women. For younger people planning ahead, the prospect of spending peak career years providing unpaid care for 2 generations is a calculable deterrent. The underlying cause of all these forces is what sociologists describe as a stalled gender revolution. Women entered the full-time workforce. Domestic responsibilities did not redistribute. Men did not absorb more household labor. Government support infrastructure was not built to match the change. The result is a half-completed shift that left both women and men in an untenable position. Women are expected to maintain careers while shouldering domestic work. Men are expected to perform as primary earners, while the economy makes that breadwinner identity increasingly unachievable. In 2023, Prime Minister Kishida characterized this as Japan's last chance, stating that the country was standing on the verge of whether we can continue to function as a society. The government spends $25 billion annually on prenatalist programs, but internal government projections have shown that even significantly higher spending would produce only marginal improvement, a finding rarely foregrounded in public budget announcements. Current policy measures include a monthly child allowance of 15,000 yen per child under 3, tuition-free university. For families with 3 or more children, government-operated AI matchmaking services deployed in 31 of Japan's 47 prefectures, backed by 300 million yen in Tokyo alone. Relocation subsidies of 1 million yen per child for families willing to leave Tokyo for rural areas. By 2022, fewer than 2,400 families had taken that offer. New overtime regulations cap hours at 45 per month, but special clauses allow companies to extend that ceiling to 100 hours. None of these interventions have moved the core numbers. As Professor Masakazu Yamauchi of Waseda University summarizes, rising living costs, persistent gender divisions of labor, and long-standing patterns of delayed marriage cannot be solved by cash alone. The government is also quietly expanding immigration. Japan's foreign worker population has quadrupled since 2007. Reforms passed in 2024 target an intake of 1.23 million workers by 2028, roughly 250,000 to 300,000 per year, a record pace for a country that has historically maintained strict restrictions. This policy is politically contested. With the election of Sani Takaichi, public resistance to immigration as a solution has increased, and the debate remains unresolved. The structural consequence of sustained low birth rates is visible in Japan's population pyramid. In 1980, Japan had approximately 7 working-age people for every retiree. That ratio has inverted. Today it stands at 1.4 workers per retiree. By 2050, projections place it at 1 worker effectively supporting 1 retiree through taxes and healthcare contributions. Total Social Security spending in Japan now exceeds $1 trillion annually. Demographic pressure is redirecting the wealth generated by the working population almost entirely toward maintaining existing obligations. By 2040, Japan faces a projected labor shortage of 11 million workers, roughly equivalent to the entire population of Greece. Japan's response has been aggressive. Automation. The country produces over 1/3 of the world's industrial robots, second only to China. Robotics are now being deployed in agriculture and retail, including trials of fully autonomous convenience store operations. Automation may address the labor shortage. It does not address the social and fiscal consequences of an aging, shrinking population. Japan's households hold approximately $14 trillion in financial assets. The majority is controlled by people over 65, concentrated in low-risk instruments, bank deposits, utilities, and established industries. Younger Japanese, facing limited domestic growth prospects, are directing capital into international index funds. This creates a form of financial hollowing. Domestic capital does not flow into growth-stage investments, while the generation that would drive a domestic growth cycle is numerically smaller and sending its savings abroad. Japan is not an isolated case. It is approximately 20 years ahead of a demographic curve that other developed economies are following. The United States and Canada remain above population replacement only because of immigration. South Korea's trajectory is more acute than Japan's. Across wealthy, educated, and safe societies, birth rates are falling consistently. The pattern raises a structural question that existing economic models were not built to address. What does sustained economic activity look like when population growth is no longer assumed? What the Japanese data shows is that young people are not disengaged or indifferent. They are making a rational assessment. The cost of housing, the hours demanded by the labor market, the absence of adequate support for working parents, and the likelihood of eventually providing unpaid elder care. Together, these represent a calculation in which family formation is economically irrational for a large portion of the population. The system has not adapted to the realities it created. Japan is the first country to confront this at scale. It will not be the last. While Japan's demographic crisis deepens, a parallel story is unfolding in other parts of the developed world, one shaped significantly by Islam. And the numbers point in the opposite direction. The global Muslim population is currently estimated at 1.9 billion. It is the fastest-growing religious group on the planet. Pew Research projects that by 2075, Islam will surpass Christianity as the world's largest religion, not because of conversion, but because of birth rates and age structure. The average Muslim woman has 2.9 children. The global average is 2.4. In many Muslim-majority countries, that figure is considerably higher. This is not a coincidence. It is a direct consequence of what Islam structurally prioritizes. where Japan's crisis is rooted in the collapse of marriage and the economic punishment of parenthood. Islamic teaching treats both as foundational obligations. Marriage in Islam is not optional or aspirational. It is considered half of one's faith. The Prophet Muhammad explicitly encouraged early marriage and large families. Marry, for I will compete with other nations in numbers on the day of resurrection. That instruction has demographic weight. In Muslim-majority societies, marriage rates remain high, and the average age at first marriage is lower than in comparable non-Muslim societies. Islamic family law also distributes financial responsibility in a way that removes one of the core barriers Japan cannot solve. The obligation of financial provision, called nafaka, rests entirely on the husband. A wife's income, if she earns one, is legally her own. She is not required to contribute to household expenses. This structure means a woman does not face the same stark trade-off between career and family that drives the M-shaped employment curve in Japan. The decision to have children is not framed as economic self-destruction. It is supported by a legal and social architecture designed around family formation. The contrast with Japan's stalled gender revolution is structural. Japan's crisis emerged precisely because women entered the workforce without a corresponding shift in domestic expectations or government support. Islamic societies address this differently, not by demanding equal domestic labor from men and women, but by assigning clear and non-negotiable roles that make family formation economically and socially viable for both parties. Whether that model is considered equitable is a separate debate. Its demographic outcomes are measurable. This dynamic is already reshaping Europe. France's total fertility rate is 1.7, the highest in Western Europe. Significant credit belongs to its Muslim origin population, concentrated in North African immigrant communities, where birth rates run considerably higher than the national average. The same pattern appears in the United Kingdom, Germany, Sweden, and the Netherlands. In each country, Muslim communities, often recently arrived and economically disadvantaged, are posting birth rates that partially offset the decline among the native non-Muslim population. In 2015 and 2016, Germany admitted over 1 million migrants, the majority from Muslim-majority countries. Birth rates ticked upward in the years that followed. The causal link is contested by demographers, but the timing is consistent with the hypothesis that immigration from high-fertility populations produces short-term demographic stabilization. The United States tells a similar story. American Muslims are one of the fastest-growing religious demographics in the country. Pew projects the Muslim share of the U.S. population will roughly double by 2050, from around 1% to approximately 2.1%, driven by both immigration and above-average birth rates. Japan, by contrast, is largely insulated from this dynamic, and not by accident. Japan has historically maintained some of the strictest immigration controls among developed nations. Its Muslim population is estimated at fewer than 300,000, less than 0.25% of the total population. There is no meaningful Islamic demographic buffer to slow the decline. The deeper implication runs beyond religion. What the Islamic model demonstrates is that birth rates are not simply a function of prosperity or education level. They are also a function of the values a society embeds in its institutions, legal structures, family expectations, the distribution of economic responsibility, and the meaning assigned to parenthood. Japan has tried to solve its demographic crisis through financial incentives. The Islamic world suggests the problem is not primarily financial. It is cultural and structural. The question is not whether families can afford children. It is whether the surrounding system, legal, economic, social, is built around the assumption that families should exist at all. Japan built its post-war economy on the assumption that it would not. The results are now visible. What is also visible, across Europe and North America, is that societies experiencing the same structural failure are being partially stabilized by populations whose institutions never made that assumption in the first place. The demographic future of the developed world is, to a significant degree, being written by communities that retained what post-industrial secularism largely discarded: a coherent, institutionally reinforced expectation that marriage is normal, parenthood is the default, and the family is the basic unit of economic life. Whether the rest of the world can rebuild that expectation without the religious architecture that supports it, and whether it would want to, is the question the next several decades will answer.